Sickness of Fire, a short story by ZeDogfather on Reddit. I felt a static pulse churn my eardrums, with that sharp cadence ringing deep in my core all through my chilled bones. Such a stir grazed into my veins, to kindle at least a gentle warmth where the frost made me sickly. What awoke me had been the radio rousing from its placid coma. Once a surge of power momentarily restored the cottage. My eyelids drew apart, and I rested my eyes upon the smoulder of ashes still dimly ablaze. From the waking haze I could not comprehend from the moon glow strewn by the window, all the shapes imbued within the shadows. My eyes settled upon the ember, and its residue crumbled upon itself, and much less of its gleaming light was all that I could now see of the chimney. The longer my eyes set upon the flames, the sharper my perception encompassed over the room, until another blast of electricity forced the singular lamp in the room glowing for a little while. So many things appeared suddenly. In the comforts of my home, I lost sense of my trophies, furniture, the dog, and Sean. I gawped at the poor thing lying on the floor. Having placed itself so far from the stove, I could not figure what might be wrong with it. The canine's eyes snapped erratically between me and the fire, and showed little interest to raise its head from the frozen floor. This dog was costly to keep around anymore, though with death nearing the end of this year, I felt there was cost now to disposing him. I felt instead, should he feel like dragging himself away and out of sight come his time, that would suit me better. Sean was a good friend, though his lifestyle made him spineless in the comforts of agreeable, boorish misfits. We remained close enough. He sat across from my chair, our seats turned towards the base of the chimney, where Sean had scooted closer to capture what was fleeting flares of warmth as the fire lashed with fickle tongues. His face was firmly directed forward. He had lost the tender glaze of his eyes, now fixated in grimace, and his lips ceased to quiver. Wrinkles were etched into his rigid expression, but I cannot recall seeing them so pronounced before. I do not believe he endured such a ghastly storm as this one. He was decades younger than I, and already he sunk into a miserable state, bearing all the clothing he could muster alone for himself. I felt no different. I had become rooted here in my own turmoil, that plagued me with baffling ease for the little while I stood out there in the ice. I hardly exerted so much as to drag my right hand beneath my blankets, recognizing now that it had been exposed far too long out of the cover. As its darkness complexion reeled me with a tender moment of shock, sensation was gone from that hand all throughout my body, apart from the core of my chest, seated the only perched organ that struggled to even pulsate. It were as if I had become encased in some immobile shell that stretched all throughout the threads of my nerves, and all I could possess was my conscience. The lamp had finally gone out, and brought us again the vague presence of a dying fire, reminding me sooner of that impalpable darkness. Yet the cabin did not blind me, for the eyes perceived that immutable boundary grey, and Sean was still there before me. He could not be made out through his familiar appearance, for I could see through the grisly darkness perverting his outline. The fall of light distorted all that I felt within, as though an eerie veil lay over my covers, and I was fearful. In solemn surrender to the numbing, I became aware, waking from the draw to temptatious dreaming, of a crawling thing at the edge of my skin, skulking in my presence. I watched the dog slither away, dragging itself paw by paw in some deliberate way, as though it could not lift itself from the floor. The hind legs slid from beneath the fur, limply as it crawled, and a pool of liquid emerged where it lied, and started to crystallize. The beast left the corner of my vision, the shimmer it drug from the piss trailing, and all that was left before me was an empty chair. But there was still something here, a thing kneeling over the folding glow of the flames, writhing beneath the rubble. The kindling light flashed little more than a spark at the hand caressing the embers, revealing to me a bent form hugging to what had died with the heat of its flame. The hunched and feeble thing sighed, and a sudden crack of light revealed to me what was Sean. So gaunt and ragged, the face of that rattled with a delirious expression of unbridled fear. The flicker of his raven eyes at me was petrifying, and dread seeped slowly within, for I could not make an effort to move from my chair. Like so, I barely made but a shudder from where I sat haplessly. In great panic, I drew a deep breath, but my eyes widened, for that sharp gas seeped into my chest with a blistering chill. It paralyzed my heart to rigid stone, and my spine wrenched my head back, pressing against the chair. My eye snapped down to behold in pain the figure of Sean before the chimney, gesturing at me, a curious motion, facing towards me with slender fingers twitching beneath the ashes, rising up and over the blackness. I knew not the strength in my contorting muscles to keep me still, so deliberate to pull my head back that I could not see what was there. I felt my skull scratching with a slow churning and a static ripple through my body, telling me something was approaching my chair. I knew with suggestive yet strewn thoughts that my hearing was shifting, for the sounds were slow and burning with excess to bear, that to listen to the moaning wood before my seat was like the scraping of bushes against my brain. What little warmth remained was fleeting, the life within me was fading, and the numbing cold slipped closer to my barely beating chest. My heart could no longer let the ice course through my limbs, yet still the slow and the grinding and the lethargic drums beat all so gently. But there came, after what felt like passing into nothingness, a sensation. A feeling caressed the vestige of my dying coil, and I felt warm again. My heart let go a little, bearing with the flowing rise of warmth in my chest a little blood that seeped to and hither, softly waking the nerves that had gone numb. It was a comfort I had forgotten, extending towards part of myself that had been stagnant in a while I was frozen. It was a rejuvenation that coaxed my pounding brain with relief from the null. It were though in such brilliancy a tender fire had been kindled near my heart, and I was brought back from a terrible coma at the brink of ice dormancy. I could not perceive in reemergence what had brought me to, what drew me from slumber, for no glow had yet revealed to me that a fire could have been brought back, for the chimney was dark. All remained hidden, for in this passage of time I was slow to reconcile with my conscience what had been occurring. For all I could see were the gentle grazing of fingers against my chest, as somewhere in the shadows someone was bringing me back to life, through a stern, though gentle rub of hands pressed against me to stimulate my heart again. That warmth grew steadily next to the beating of my chest, and lifted the cold veil from me, yet I could not regain the senses to yet to move, or to feel the end of my fingers and toes. For I felt all over me those rapid strikes of blood against the ends of my nerves, and knew that my body was regaining strength, somehow. I could feel sensations spreading throughout my bodily prison, though suddenly I had become severely tense. The strange fire had become sharp in heat, and I realized a sudden force was being dealt at my chest, directly over where my heart was beating, nearly thrashing. From where that heat originated came something else, as though licks of flames took to rough and grisly forms and forced its way into my flesh. Dawning upon my lucid mind came dread in understanding, for this was not warmth, but an awful insertion into my breast. The terrible pain of something tearing away at my flesh and bones to reach for where my heart was struggling to beat. The muscles shook violently around my torso. It gave me a piercing shock throughout my body, and in such numbing pain, I lost sense of everything else that was not convulsing in agony. In the moment, I was blinded in sheer pain, but I could perceive, through frayed nerve endings being ripped from my chest, where violence was tenderly woven through my body. They were like worms, tendrils gripping in forceful ways as they grazed and brushed within and between the folds of muscles that were bound within me, separating them as the warmth in my body spread over to feel their coarse skin. They enveloped there inside me for so long that I was able to recognize the uniform shapes of hands buried within, and in utter displacement of my body, I tried focusing through my eyes at what was happening. The darkness draped about us, so I could not immediately grasp the corporeal shadow knelt there before my chair. The shape was removed from all features in the stillness that suddenly broke as a rapid burst of light sprung yet again from the lamp. It flickered quickly enough to comprehend, in my naked state of weakness, a man with his hands sliding beneath my skin. His eyes were blackened, a savagery rearing in absence of life in his reddened face, splattering now with the red of my wounds, and his expression revealed a belligerent mirth that flashed in rapid tangents of light. I felt a fierce stinging in my eyes that forced tears over my eyelids, burning from me all that I could visibly see as the lamp produced a final flash of sparks before it all became dark. My heart violently pulsated in response to such pain, for as the hands were clasping nearer to it, they were drenched in my warmth, in the blood that still dimly glowed as the white glow of snow outside was vaguely present. The sensation retracted from all that resided in my bodily form, the nerves deadened in the moments passing, and all that remained of myself had slowly began to reduce to the very warmth of my being. It all fled from me in those moments. Absent to me were my sight and my memories that I possessed, for all I knew was that I was living throughout a body that no longer responded to me, as the hands that moved violently responded to me in such a way that I could adhere. Strangely, I did not fade, for the last of my essence did not dry upon the carcass of an elderly man. The ebb and flow of life held, containing me in a gross transference of the man forcing his hands into my body, finally grasping at the heart that quivered pathetically in his hands. He pressed, squeezing, to capture there what was left, and in such a way I began to feel that warmth I sought. In those moments succumbing to the winter sickness, an embrace for something that burned like the fire in our chimney. The warmth that was trapped there surged one final time, relenting in the hands of one who would reach for it, and like the embers of the fire no longer kindling, I had been absorbed and joined. As the blood soaked upon my flesh, it drew me back from a wavering affliction nearest to death, and in this moment I was seized with powerful vigor and warmth, to have taken life that was once mine, and to be whole again. And now I stood in the waning phase of an unnatural transition, away from the body that had once been a part of me. For all warmth that lingered in red was no longer, and I was possessed in the drapes of a bloodied man standing above my partner in solemn absence of thought. I, Peter, was seated there, before me, with his chest torn open and innards spread all about my feet. He gawked there, his face distorted in his liberation that was truly painful, yet his eyes depicted blissful glee that I wrought from forceful necessary action, that all the while he suffered. He only did so in joy. Staring at him brought me relief, and I remained standing, dripping in what was only lasting for moments, the blood of fire within him that brought me here, admiring the sight a little longer. Moments were gone, and a realization had passed before I noticed the dog was gone from the cabin. After a while of being so weakly and feeble, it somehow took the strength to escape, having clawed and chewed through the frail door enough that the bottom frame was torn to let it crawl its way out. I paused a while, as the warmth receded to my core, and the familiar freeze of winter threatened me yet again. I now possessed our will, somehow in the harrowing light of tearing my friend apart, to undo in such disparity. And no doubt I could muster the effort to rekindle a new fire within the chimney. But there was something left behind from this beautiful moment, a terrible hunger. The warmth that soaked over my arms and chest was of the likes I had not felt, that I could not resist in this profound scene. There was never a woman who could satiate this fervour in his life or mine, and no beast, civilized or feral, that could turn its cheek to such opportunity. Nothing compared to this. Nothing eased the insatiable, this maddening crave, when standing in the bowels of an abysmal winter, where we are only husks. Here at this bloodletting, the moon was nearly over, and the peak of the sun had only seared a faint light through the blasting gusts of this terrible blizzard, and the only fire left burning was a passion of the likes I have never felt. Before long, I shifted my weight, carrying myself toward the mangled door to open, and I did but twist its knob to have it swing open, shattering the entire thing off the hinges. The opening revealed to me what was the buried town, where the blizzard had slowed and a sudden roar of barking had stirred lights in the windows all across the street. The stench had finally carried out from the cabin. The dog had carried itself for only a little ways, lying there out in the middle of the street, before a handful of townsfolk began to emerge from their cabins, watching it from a far distance away while it perished. I marched out, heaving the weight of Peter's blood all drenched upon my clothing, into the storm and before the town, and I stood looming over the dog, with only a little time to lose. When the screams of the townsfolk were let loose, I could only make out perpetual screeching, the noise of rustic static grinding against my skull.